My apologies.
I think I was napping about that time, so you didn't bother me. I was reading my homework, not this class. A different
That's
one.
why you were napping.
Oh man. Okay, well, I guess we can go ahead and get started. So I'll call the Conservation Resources, Air, Greenhouse Gas, and Climate Committee to order at 7:01 p.m. So let's pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Ready for a roll call? Yes, official.
Chairman Jeff Duncan,
Here.
Vice Chair Stephanie Youngblood,
Here.
Jan Clark-Kretz,
Here.
Greg Obranovich,
Here.
David Ring,
Here.
Maureen Valley,
Here.
Lorraine Theobald. I see her there.
Here.
And we don't have either of our auxiliary members yet, so.
Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and at this time we'll have committee comment for items that are not on today's agenda. Anyone would like to make comment about anything not on the agenda? Seeing no comment, do we have public viewing that would like to make a comment for items not on this agenda?
Michelle's being sleuth. She's just observing.
Okay, very good. Okay, so need a motion to adopt tonight's agenda. Hey, Michelle.
I'll make it.
Also move.
Second.
And so Stephanie, were you first?
I think Jan was,
So Jan made the motion, David second.
I was gonna say I was the fourth.
and I was like third.
Okay,
Well, we're ready to go, I think. Let's have a vote.
okay. Jeff Duncan,
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Yes.
Jan Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
Greg Obranovich,
Yes.
David Ring,
Yes.
Maureen Valley,
Yes.
and Lorraine Theobald.
Yes.
So I see public comment on consent agenda. Do we have minutes or have we, I don't see any minutes to vote on or anything else under consent. Do we have that?
Were they in your
Oh.
packet?
I thought we had them.
They were, but they're not on the
They're
agenda.
not
So we'll have
listed
to,
on the agenda.
Okay,
yeah.
so it was the May,
May minutes.
yeah. So could I get a,
I think we have to continue it.
Just
Oh,
do
okay.
that at the next meeting.
Yeah.
okay, that sounds good. All right, well, let's get right down to what matters and the comment and discussion themes for tonight. So take it away,
Matthew.
Matthew. He's still thinking about David and the Jefferson, Iowa connection, like, wow.
Yeah,
What's going on?
Lisa, who would have been? Lisa, I can't think of it.
That's something.
Okay,
A whole different life ago, huh?
that's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for indulging a short presentation. And then review of the draft element itself. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now and let's see. Screen one, screen two. Screen one. Are you seeing, are you seeing an introductory slide
Nope, your
No.
desktop.
Okay, okay. I'm glad this part isn't timed.
There, you got it.
Oh, all right. Let's see. No, I'm not seeing. All right, this is going to be a little bit clunky, but that's okay. Not advanced slides. Oh, did I
That works.
advance the slide? Oh my gosh.
That works.
Okay, so we're gonna quickly review some of the comments and discussion themes that this subcommittee has provided to date. Take a look at the actual revised draft air quality GHG energy part of the conservation of resources element, and then talk about the next steps. So to start with, some of the themes that we've been getting from this committee, as well as input that we've received from the general plan email address and so the social pinpoint application, include support for collaborative efforts to reduce air quality GHG emissions, external funding looking for incentives to encourage behavior that would purchase of cleaner equipment, vehicles, et cetera, that would reduce air quality, air pollutant emissions and GHG emissions. Recognition of the importance of integrating land use and transportation planning to reduce emissions, since this is transportation is the top source of air pollutant emissions and GHG emissions. Support for maintaining, expanding tree canopy, multi-use trail system, including identifying gaps to destinations and how the town should fill those gaps. Promoting electric vehicles and charging for electric vehicles. Solar, installation of solar, including on town properties and other technologies. Support for incentives to convert, advertising incentives to convert existing wood stoves and other items. So the general plan update will proceed roughly, or at least this section of this element you'll see in a minute, will show some of these themes. We've tried to clarify goals and create policies. The existing policies from the general plan were really not statements of a position or a policy. They were really more implementation measures. So we're creating policies essentially for air quality and adding new material for greenhouse gas emissions and energy, since those topics were not addressed yet in the last general plan. We are working with the theme, at least to date, that there's not a need to repeat existing regulatory requirements as policies. So for example, the building code, Cal Green Code, has energy efficiency requirements for new development. We don't need to say those building code requirements will be implemented for new development, since it's the law, and we're trying to focus here on the town's discretionary policy. You'll see a change related to carbon monoxide modeling, which is dispersion modeling, which is not really required anymore for reasons that I'll discuss later. Reference to the need to reduce vehicle miles traveled, transportation being the #1 source of emissions and the #1 user of energy. Some feasibility items, and then some new policy on land use planning to avoid major sources of toxic air contaminants. So the chair mentioned all the homework that he was doing this afternoon. That has included reviewing the setting, which has been revised. Air quality, GHG, and energy settings have all been revised. You've had the original plus a revision to take a look at that will guide changes to policy language. And then the draft elements are are being updated as well. And I should mention two other important items for change to the general plan. The first is when the elements are drafted and revised, we will need to review them all together to make sure they are consistent with one another and supportive of one another. So there may be changes in the circulation element, for example, that might inspire us to make changes to the greenhouse gas emissions section of conservation resources to be consistent, or maybe to reduce repetitive policy statements. That's one area of change that's important. The second that I wanted to mention is after we draft the general plan, we will draft an environmental document to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. For part of that document, part of that EIR, Environmental Impact Report, will be to identify feasible mitigation for significant environmental impacts. And mitigation to address those potential impacts could take the form, will likely take the form of new or revised policy or new or revised implementation measures for the general plan. So the general plan is in draft form. It will have at least two phases of types of revisions to ensure internal consistency, and then to look at environmental effects and new policies that could address those effects. So we will share with you in just a second the proposed revisions to goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures for the air quality, GHG, and energy subsection of the conservation and resources element. We're looking to you to inform that revised language, to provide recommendations, to provide concurrence to what we have proposed. Your recommendations will be then forwarded to the umbrella conservation of resources committee for their action in recommending the draft general plan, in this case, conservation of resources element, air quality, GHG, energy section, a recommendation to Planning Commission. Okay, so with that, I am going to now attempt to share the actual revised element. Let's see if I can do that. Something has happened. Damn it. Uh-oh. Something has gone awry. I can no longer, let me see.
There it is.
Can you still see the element?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna do it this way. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Can't see me any longer. Okay, this is the way it's gonna have to be. I'm so sorry to deprive you of seeing my beautiful face while I'm walking you through this material. Okay, so we start in the conservation of resources element with an introduction and a discussion of policies related to natural resources and open space. So moving along here to, maybe I'll make it a little larger, anticipating that request, to our section here that we're focused on this evening: air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and energy. So we have a short introduction here that talks about what sort of issues are involved and what sort of focus the objectives and policies have. Well, let me share first, I guess, the goal. So there's this goal related to our subsection of this element. The goal is a statement is a future desired state. So here we're saying, in the future, we want reduced generation of air pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions and reduced reliance on GHG generating energy sources. And then with that omnibus sort of goal, we introduced these topics, and we have several objectives within this section. The first is to integrate the town's land use and circulation planning to reduce air pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions. As I keep saying, that's because mobile sources are the biggest source. So that needs to be the focus of any legitimate effort to reduce air pollutant emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. And then we roll into policies, which are very difficult for me to read. So I'm going to switch to final view, and I'll go back and forth so that you can see areas of change compared to policies that were just carried forward from last time around. First is coordinate with Placer County Air Pollution Control District and other agencies in efforts to reduce air pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions from existing sources and new development. And then to implement that policy, we have these two implementation measures. This first one is describing the environmental review process, and this one is describing one outside of reviewing new development and imposing mitigation. Another idea is to incent behavior, like I said, and that's what this implementation is about. The first one is during the development review process, the town will require that project proponents conduct an air quality analysis to determine potential air quality impacts. Analysis will evaluate emissions relative to PCA, the air district thresholds of significance or other applicable thresholds. Those projects that could exceed applicable significance thresholds or could otherwise result in significant air quality impacts shall incorporate applicable and feasible mitigation measures as recommended by the air district or otherwise demonstrated to achieve reductions in order to minimize or offset construction and operational emissions. So that's a big, long way to say the town will look at new projects, consider their effects, and incorporate strategies to reduce those impacts consistent with what the air district says.
Hey, Matthew,
Yes.
I know you probably can't see, but David has his hand up.
Oh, yes, I don't see any of that. So please do.
Are we taking questions now, or are we doing it at the
Oh, I'm
end?
sorry. Yes. I want to take input as we go along. If
Okay.
that's
So
that
then,
pleases the chair. Yeah.
yeah, so going back to, we're working with the circulation. I haven't been to any of those meetings. Are you bringing that up during those meetings? You're saying these are the things that we're talking about in the conservation of resources element. We're trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We need to work on that for land use. So is that something that comes up with them, or does that not even show up in the conversation?
I'm going to rely on somebody else more familiar with
Those topics are showing up in our conversation at the various land use committees.
Thank you. And then, so for policy on line 1 right there, my preference is, and I don't know if it's a policy or what, but since this is supposed to be a long-term document, and it is possible that the Placer County Air Pollution Control District doesn't exist in, say, 10 years, it might be something else. Is it something that is it understood that this is what it was at the time that it was written in 10 years, or should we say the administrative agency and then just refer to whatever the administrative agency is for?
I think that's a good thing to be sensitive to, but the air districts are enshrined in the California Clean Air Act.
Okay.
For that reason, it's very unlikely they would change or their name would change.
Okay. And then the very last thing is, if you're going to, this is just more of a technical thing, if you're going to abbreviate PCA, PCD, you should put that in parentheses right next to where you first define it as the Placer County Air Pollution Control District.
Yeah, you're right. I prefer not abbreviating at all, because this material could be pulled out, for example, and used directly as a mitigation measure, and it might only appear that way, and you might see just the implementation measure. So in policies and implementation, my preference is not to abbreviate ever. even though it's super fun to know lots and lots of acronyms as planners, I think it will create some more clarity if we avoid that.
All right.
In the glossary, there's
I don't
also
care
going
either
to be
way.
a list of agencies, so that'll also show up there,
Yeah.
Okay.
And all the acronyms, they're there too.
and all the acronyms.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And if I can point everybody to the chat, Michelle Reeves typed in a thing about anti-gas stoves, natural gas sourcing, and looking at things like wood stoves. If there's any comment, Matthew, you have on that.
Let's see. I can't see the.
Oh, okay. So it says there is a burgeoning anti-gas stove movement because A, indoor air quality is terrible where used, and B, natural gas sourcing pours a lot of methane into the air. If you're going to be looking at things like wood stoves, ? Which makes her sad because she loves her gas stove.
Well, I can't address that last part. I'm sure she is sad about that. But with regard to the other components, yes, this is something that communities are looking at for new development. In fact, I believe on Tuesday night, the city council in Sacramento had a first reading of an ordinance to ban new natural gas within residential and non-residential developments of a certain size, with some other kind of clarifying exemptions. It is a source of greenhouse gas emissions. Yes, for sure, and is it's something that I think is likely to become a future regulatory rollout from AB 32, SB 32, the big climate law in California. Not getting there yet. It's individual communities right now. But that would be, if we want to have policy about limiting or prohibiting new natural gas in new developments, yes, for this general plan, this would be the place to do it. It is nice for some people. They prefer that sort of cooking. I don't, know if the committee has any, if folks on the committee have any opinion one way or the other relative to new development.
If I remember right, I'm on
difficult.
the Public Services Committee,
Yeah.
and I think we got rid of it. We removed the requirement for them to have natural gas. We didn't say we're not banning it, but we're saying that it doesn't have to be in there.
Correct.
Is that going to be starting to include heating system with gas? People's heaters? Central air?
Yeah.
Yeah. Electric heat pumps instead of gas-fired furnaces, right? Yes.
All right. Wow.
If there was a policy about that, it would be across the board. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very effective.
Can I make a comment about 512 while we're talking about it? Old, inefficient, and highly polluting are all, how old is old, how inefficient is inefficient, and how highly polluting is highly polluting. I like the intent, but I don't know. If my fireplace is 3 years old, is that too old? If it's 5 years old, is that too old? I don't want to put a number on it, but at the same time, I don't know. It leaves it up a lot to the discretion of the council, which is fine if we're okay with that.
Matthew, I think the EPA actually has, I know when I bought my house, I had to get rid of a wood stove and it had to comply with certain codes on the stove. So I think the EPA actually does have recommendations for, more efficient wood stoves.
I think there's a certification.
And building code, I believe.
Yes, and
Regulations.
Placer County. Yes, Placer County Air Pollution Control District has a rule for new wood stoves through the EPA certification program. That's for new things, and that's true. This implementation is focused on existing wood stoves and incentives to swap them out. The reason why we're using this vague language is because the incentive programs will define how old is too old, and they can change over time. So I didn't want to, chart that out with that level of detail, and instead rely on those incentive programs as they're updated over time.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Lorraine, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to question the use of the word old. I think it's sufficient to say inefficient and polluting, and not focus exclusively on wood, but also on gas. It's quite demonstrable about how both polluting and inefficient they are in comparison to newer technologies, which I think we should be promoting. And it doesn't have to be highly polluting. I think it's just polluting.
But they're all polluting is the problem. I'm okay including gas in there too. But yeah, I mean, even my electric one is polluting if you consider the source.
Lorraine had a comment in the chat that says you will love an induction stove even more than a gas stove or a fireplace, and it uses 60% less energy. So just to share that along, that was interesting.
I think home heating devices in terms of gas also include water heaters and air conditioning and how they're powered.
Yeah.
So can I probe for consensus on policy language that would or implementation that would move the town away from gas stoves for new developments of a certain size?
It seemed like we all voted for it in the, well, I'd say everybody who was talking voted for it in the Conservation of Resources meeting.
And more important, nobody disagreed, so.
Yeah. That's,
Well, I think
Matthew,
as long I was going to say, as long as the language says that incentives to encourage the replacement of these older technologies, I'm comfortable with that. You just don't want to say, get to the point where you're going to make people have to change over. I just bought a brand new heater, gas heater anyway, I guess that's my comment. I don't know what the next leap is to when you start, making people do it, other than requiring it in new new homes, but not retrofitting, older homes. I wouldn't say.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about is for new development. How do we feel?
Yeah, just like they're requiring solar on houses now, on new houses. I think that's fair because it's something that's brand new, and it's not, you're not asking people to tear out their whole system to replace it with new technology, which would be double expensive. As long as we're not going down that road, I think we're fine. And I don't think people would object to getting to the point where we will require it for new construction.
Okay.
And I don't know how you want to build that into the language, but I think the way, as long as you say promote available incentives to encourage, I think you're okay.
For
Is everybody
5.1 .2, that's just the replacement part. Where would we be talking about new home or new building? Where is that at?
It's not in there at this point.
Oh, okay, I see. So, yeah, I'm along with Greg. Anything to encourage the replacement of the old or inefficient and highly polluting wood stoves. I'm not sure if APCD has a program for replacing other heating devices, but they do have the wood stove program. As far as new home builds, that is the trend that's coming.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't have a problem with that either, having that in there. I think it's, you know, overall it's just better. I know some people say, oh, it doesn't taste the same, or however they're cooking, it's not the same, but I don't know about that.
Well, it's like your barbecue. A lot of people will argue about what kind of a barbecue you should use for your flavors.
Right. So, but as far as more efficient and safer, I think that's the way to go, is all electric for new home building.
Okay. Any disagreement with that, or can I type in the word consensus?
Sounds like consensus is good.
All right, removing the question mark. Okay, let's see. Okay, next policy. Support land use and transportation projects that place homes and destinations in closer proximity, increase accessibility to transit, improve bicycle pedestrian access, promote carpooling or van pooling, or otherwise reduce passenger vehicle demand. So this is going to need to be coordinated with the circulation element.
Right.
And then we have,
and in circulation, Matthew, equestrian was brought into that mix.
a question. What was that?
Horses. Horses.
Oh.
Oh yeah. That's right. Horses versus bikes, right?
Equestrian for reaching destinations.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In Loomis.
All right, old school. I like it.
For bicycle, pedestrian, and equestrian. Bicycle / pedestrian / equestrian.
Well, is that what Anders, is that what they decided in circulation?
Yes, they did. Yeah, to include it, but they recognized, and we had that whole discussion, that equestrian and bicycles really can't be together.
Right.
For the opportunities to provide those alternative means of travel.
But, you know, along that, are you going to open up a can of worms where now you're going to have to provide horse paths for people to move around with their horses? I mean, that's getting a little bit out of hand. I think we need to steer away from that. I mean, you know, there's a big difference between horses and bicycles. Bicycles are very utilitarian. Horses are just, you know, purely recreational. No, maybe people might want to argue that, but I'll take them on if they do.
Well,
I said it.
It would be very unusual to be looking at that as any sort of credible strategy for reducing air pollutant emissions or greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. Yeah. I heard the discussion about the horses on the circulation. I listened to that meeting, and I don't know, maybe I missed some of the details, and they were talking about, and I did see a couple girls actually walking down Taylor Road, making a left-hand turn to go to the Taylors right in the road, and they were waiting at the signal for the left-hand turn. But that doesn't happen very often. And I wouldn't build in any kind of a program or comment to, you know, I mean, that's going to happen and people want to do that, and I'm totally fine with that. But I don't think we need to, you know, put these things into the element to create a situation where you might have to have special accommodations for horses. It would be way prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, you don't have to water or feed a bike, right? So we would have we'd have to have water troughs available, you know, and posts. So I'm with Greg on that. I don't think we need to.
Yeah, I think we should just skip in fact, I think we should, if we have opportunity to forward any recommendations, is to maybe kind of point out that we decided to completely exclude the mention of horses in this whole equation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if it goes anywhere, maybe in the parks and rec, if we're adding trails, horse trails,
Yeah.
if they want it in there.
Exactly. In a park, you want equestrian trails, that's absolutely appropriate. But not to town.
Any disagreement?
Michelle has a comment.
Well, I don't have a comment about the horse. I'm not weighing in on that. I actually have a VMT question. So if y'all want to finish on the equestrian side, I can ask my VMT question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love
Can't
horses.
pay me to get involved in the horse conversation. I'm staying out of that one.
Yeah. That's why I said I love horses. Don't get me wrong. Yeah.
I
I would also offer.
Not for
Go
the
ahead.
pollution.
I would also offer, for the purposes of air quality, greenhouse gas, and energy, that while it may be important for other elements and it may have validity for other respects of the general plan, depending on how the conversations go, it's not an emissions source reduction of any quantifiable value, I would say. So I think it's really important to keep in context with what we're looking at here.
Exactly.
It's emissions of another type.
It's also true.
Yep.
I don't want to quantify those if I don't have to.
So everybody, any dispute with leaving that out?
Not with me.
Okay. Seeing none.
Can I ask my VMT now? Is this consensus? Matthew's typed consensus, so it's official.
Right.
And you guys have probably covered this, but I am not always up to date on every state's regulatory environment that I work in. So I know that a bunch of stuff on the statewide basis has moved from level of service to reducing VMT, but there's a connection to CEQA. But I guess I just was curious, and maybe Matthew, you can weigh in. I mean, how robust is this movement to VMT, and what, I guess just in plain English, what is it that the state wants to see, and what are they going to be measuring? There are a lot of California communities I work with right now that are, trying to plan for growth, and none of them are talking about reducing VMT. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, what is the state going to really be looking at? Are there going to be teeth? And what are the impacts now with sort of that shift? I guess that was my question, because that really relates back to this question in terms of things to reduce VMT. But I'm just wondering, what are they going to be measuring, and what performance is going to have to happen as a part of that?
Yeah, that's a really, really big question. But the state law change relates to the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and removes consideration of the social inconvenience of congestion from CEQA documents. That can't be an environmental impact anymore. It can't be the subject of feasible mitigation. It's a social inconvenience thing. And instead of just leaving it at that, they also asked OPR to weigh in on a replacement, and OPR recommended that VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is the most is the recommended replacement for evaluating transportation effects of projects. So moving to transportation demand generated by new projects instead of demand over supply congestion. And it creates no requirement for the town to do anything other than evaluate VMT in CEQA documents, unless you have a streamlining strategy or the project is exempt from environmental review. That's the only requirement. However, there will be, the carrots will have and will continue to include a lot of federal money getting filtered through the state, getting filtered through the COGS to support projects that reduce VMT, facilities, perhaps in the future, even development projects that would reduce VMT, a lot of state money going to the same topic. So, you know, as usual, the carrots behind this state law change have a lot to do with throwing money at things that would reduce vehicular travel demand.
Okay. So that's going to be a really big change for communities, and it certainly has a huge amount to do with housing. Like, probably soon you're going to see more and more of a connection between trying to meet the state's housing requirements and then also, I don't know, I just would guess you're going to see more teeth in reducing VMT over time as well.
Yeah,
Which really, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can jump in a little bit. With Costco, we saw a lot of emphasis on VMT, and they have a lot of discussion about how VMT reduction applied to the Costco project. And it was really interesting. And we had less discussion about level of service. And also, I kind of want to throw it out because at that last, and Andres, you were, you know, I know you were there on the last circulation committee meeting. They talked about level of service and VMT. And I was just kind of curious about that because they were kind of still wanting to set levels of service. They talked about D in a lot of areas as being acceptable. So I don't know if you can actually have both. And is that what we want to do? And that's just, I'm just throwing out that as food for thought for people as we move forward. And if we're emphasizing VMT, but the circulation committee was talking about VMT and level of service.
You know, they're not incompatible, Greg, but they could become as it becomes more robust. And I just want to say, actually being the negotiator with the Air Pollution Control District on Costco, they were exceedingly robust. And as you know, in the Costco project, there was mitigation that went along with it that was demanded by APTD. So they were very robust. They were fair, but they were very robust in their analysis of VMT. So definitely, Michelle is going to get stronger. And I think we're still looking, I think, in the town here, what that VMT standard is. I know for Placer County, it's a 15% reduction, I believe, over 2016. Is that, or 2019? Is that right, Matthew?
I believe that's right. And really importantly, related to something Michelle said, so she's talking about growing communities in California, not necessarily focusing on reducing VMT. All the guidance, the overwhelming majority of the guidance on this topic in terms of what reduction to hit, a lot of communities just arbitrarily set 15% just because that's what the Office of Planning and Research recommended. But it's not 15% mass. It's not, you know, count your VMT in 2021, then count it in 2040, and it has to be 15% less. Very importantly, it's 15% lower per unit of development, you know, so it could be 15% lower per capita or 15% lower per employee plus resident or something like that. So it's all about efficiency of travel, not about like having actual what's the word I'm looking for? A numeric reduction in time of VMT.
Well, it was also interesting in Costco that there was some credit given because of the membership coming out of the Auburn, Loomis, et cetera area was actually reducing VMT coming to the Costco site in Loomis versus going to the Roseville site. So the calculations got quite complex looking at all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well,
yeah.
I think we're at the beginning of that journey, and I think it's going to get stricter, and there's going to be more teeth in those things, and it really is going to speak to very strongly to efficiency of land use and then multimodalities. But just, you know, having a strong core, having some concentrated commercial, looking at things like retail loss, like everyone's going to be a lot more of that in that business than they have been in the past in California, which has been just like greenfield and build it and we need sales tax. It's gonna, that VMT is gonna throw a wrinkle in the way most people approach this stuff. So that really just jumps out at me. I think it's here because it says, you know, new development is going to have to look at it. But I think as a town, I think it's really important to think about how you're talking about both housing and climate change and reducing VMT. Like these are housing requirements and VMT requirements are going to be coming from the state and getting probably stronger and more stringent. And I think it's just an interesting way to start framing some of this stuff for the community in a bigger way.
Yeah, and you know, in addition to the regulatory hammer, we know that transportation is the #2 household cost. Housing is the first, transportation is #2 in the United States West. So anything you do to make it easier for folks to get around without a private car also frees up discretionary income they can spend on other things like the shops downtown. And it's the way you keep in shape too, in a sort of involuntary way. If you're traveling around in some active transportation mode like walking or biking, it's positively correlated with health outcomes. Maybe I've taken this note about the critical importance of this. There is treatment of this topic in this element. There will be treatment of that topic also in circulation, and I think there should be in land use as well, but I'm not 100% sure of what that language looks like right now. So it's okay with the group. I just want to kind of park this as let's think about how strong to make our language when the whole thing kind of coalesces. That's all right.
I would add the circulation into the housing and land use as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Like you said, it's all related. Where the housing is, where the how the circulation works, it all is related to our vehicle miles traveled, so, or the pollution. So that's what's going to be interesting, is how you guys put it all together, make those connections.
Yeah.
A question. We were talking about this in my SACOG meeting today, talking about how, vehicle miles traveled, they're going to, start pushing for somehow calculating that for us citizens over the short, maybe 5-year period, and how that's going to flush out. So say these big policy changes happen, and we are supposed to be updating our general plan every 5 years. So then theoretically in 5 years, with some of these big changes we've been talking about, is that we would then update our general plan? Or do we, we can update our general plan, 4 times a year? I mean, how does that work normally when you have big changes like that?
Recommendation, Jan, would be that you watch those changes, see how they float out, because it takes a few years to get some of the implementation correct and guidance correct. And when it seems solid enough, then you update your general plan, because the other thing is you are required to be in compliant with state laws. So even though you have a general plan, you're going to be in compliant with state laws. But you don't want to go putting something into your general plan that ties you down that no longer is relevant into the future. So we're at a difficult stage here. A couple things. One, the annual progress report is done every year, and it's encouraged that if you see any changes that need to be made, can be made. You make those changes on an annual basis, and then you have a larger look at your general plan at the 5-year period. And so with this general plan, the introduction will have a discussion about that with the annual progress report that is April of every year, you look at it, you budget for changes, and then definitely major updates every 5.
Wow, that'd be so different. And so would that count? So do we get the 1 annual potential change, or does that count towards the 4, or how does that work?
It counts towards one of the 4.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have some implementation measures here to for this policy. Town will maintain and update as appropriate transportation impact fees that are allocated based on net vehicular travel demand rather than peak hour trip generation. And new development shall contribute on a fair share basis to the cost of providing multimodal transportation, including bikeways, pedestrian paths, and transit facilities. This is an important change, and it's a little bit egg-headed, but transportation impact fees can be very high. I've seen fees as high as $25,000 per dwelling unit. And historically, just let me just say that most development impact fees structures, nexus study structures, are just not very good. They're not very sensitive to location or sensitive to development type, and are not sophisticated. This will be an area of state legislation as well as it relates to housing development. But this move from allocating fees based on how much vehicular travel demand you're generating instead of your peak hour trip generation rates is really important. It could affect how fees are calculated in different parts of the town, or for denser housing development or affordable housing development, fees would be a lot lower because VMT is much lower for affordable housing development. It tends to be lower for compact type of housing development, or housing development that is near services and destinations.
Is vehicle travel demand, that is directly related to VMTs, right?
That's
how they measure it, right? Okay.
It's just another way to say it without
I just wanted to verify that.
Yeah. Okay. And this will be treated in the circulation element, I'm sure, as well, and we'll fight about who has the best language.
Well, the other thing is, where is the most appropriate place to have that policy that has teeth? But we'll get there when we get all these separate elements combined together.
Yeah. Town will requirement that new developments dedicate land sufficient for park and ride lots when the location is appropriate for such facilities. This is an old policy that was in the 2001 general plan. Town will pursue funding for transportation infrastructure improvement programs targeted at affecting air pollutant GHG emissions reductions. So this is talking about the carrots that are available now and that will be available looking forward through SACOG, through the state, through the federal government, allocating money that's for active transportation or other projects that reduce passenger vehicle demand. I think this language could be improved a little bit. I'm not sure exactly, but so I'm going to rely on consensus with the concept and give me enough leash to spice up or to clarify the wording just a little bit, make it not so clunky.
Can I go back one just real quick? Is there something in for 5132? Is there something in the general plan somewhere else where it talks about requiring new developments to dedicate land that for bike paths that are already essentially defined in the bike master plan?
There are policies in the general plan that talk about providing trails and bike trails in new development. They're not as strong as we want to see them, so I think that will be in the land use element, that will be in the parks and recreation element, and circulation. But we're reviewing a project right now, and that policy is nowhere near where it should be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next policy, reduce air pollutant GHG emissions from town operations, the town itself, to the extent feasible through investments in energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, and clean transportation. So that means replacing the town's vehicle equipment fleet over time with more fuel efficient, low emission vehicles like electric vehicles. It means pursuing funding to install electric vehicle infrastructure, charging to serve both town vehicles and the community, and also using very low volatile organic VOC or reactive organic gases, very low content for architectural coatings. This is a really technical implementation measure where maybe we should consider dropping the numeric targets and using some recognized terms such as, I think it's literally called, Suzanne, it's called very low emitting architectural coatings or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they're like
Or extremely low, I
low
think.
or super low. It's a funny little term, but yeah. And right now the term refers to a 10 grams per liter, but it certainly could change over time. So by all means, there's no reason to include that numeric target in this for a long-term planning document.
Yeah.
I think that's true, because that way, if it's deemed to be safer to have more or deemed to be not as safe and you need to have less, then somebody else is making that decision and not us.
Or even more importantly, what's commercially available, that changes over time.
That 10 grams per liter is a readily available standard kind of product metric that we went with, but again, I just wouldn't include it for a long-term planning document. There's no reason. We can generalize that.
Agree. That just causes confusion in the future. So I agree.
I'm going to trudge ahead and rely on Mary Beth and others to see little hands raised and whatnot.
All clear for now.
Okay. Awesome. So moving along, next policy review and condition development projects as appropriate for consistency with state and regional GHG reduction targets. There is a lot in this little tiny sentence. But essentially, well, we get into it in the implementation. We'll explain what we mean there. Here's another VMT focused policy: prioritize projects that manage travel demand by providing for complementary land use mix, integrating alternative transportation infrastructure and programs, improving the jobs housing balance such that local employment opportunities fit the local job interests and ability of residents, improving proximity and access to key destinations, or otherwise decrease VMT. So, I think we do have a fair amount of focus in this existing set of recommendations on VMT. So that earlier parked comment on should we strengthen, I'm feeling more confident about the level of treatment here, but I'll keep that there for another round of potential revisions.
Is it really our responsibility to, so 5.16, the policy, is it our responsibility? So does that mean we're supposed to make sure that they are consistent with state and regional targets?
Okay, let me.
Is there more coming?
Yes, let me
Okay.
this will become clear in this implementation measure. So it's implementing that policy. The town will.
Stephanie has a question.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
sorry.
Go ahead, Tiff.
Hi. So I have a quick question. I know that I probably drive further than a lot of people to work. Currently not right now, but in the future when we all have to go back to our offices. And I know that parts of Placer County have like transportation set for people who have to take the light rail. Are we ever gonna, and I might be jumping the gun a little bit, but I drive like 70 miles a day when I have to actually go in the office. And a lot of times I take the light rail or I take the Placer County Transit to Wada 80, switch trains, go all the way out to almost South Sac, and then have to do that again. Now I see a lot of this going on about like in town, but is there going to be anything in down the road for people to just try to discourage us from, because you were talking about peak hours, not peak hours, things like that. Is there going to be anything down the road that's going to kind of try to help people like me that have to drive long distance and at weird hours, that rush hour traffic, things like that, like transportation they'll pick up in Loomis and help with that? Or is this just basically as well in the town of Loomis by itself? Because some of us do create traffic coming back and forth. So
you're asking whether whether we should be thinking about people that currently have to drive high miles and whether Loomis ought to coordinate with the other jurisdictions in the region to improve transit availability for the work commute so that the U's of the world don't have to do that so much anymore.
So basically what I'm trying to say is there are people like me who create extra traffic. I don't want to tattle on myself, but people who drive every day during the peak hours that create extra gas and things like that, and congestion coming in and out of town, because we can't, like, I guess there's one bus that picks up like 3 times a day, and it's the awkward times where you have to get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and catch it and go to Sacramento, and it doesn't go all over Sacramento, it just goes to like downtown. And then if you like work in Rancho, you're just out of luck. I'm just wondering if there's going to be in the future ways in which, like, other ways that people can get downtown without driving in town, so to speak. Like I could walk to the train depot and get on a bus that picks up in Loomis, or I don't know. I'm just,
Well,
as opposed to me using my gas powered car that I
Take
just
a look
bought.
in the, look in the circulation element. Yesterday, the circulation committee had that discussion, discussed coordination with the buses with Caltrain, discussed buses to light rail coming from the depot. So take a look in there. That is being discussed. But if you have additional recommendations, that'd be appreciated. But the circulation element went up on the website today, so you can begin reviewing that.
And if I could just jump in, I know that we are working closely with Placer County Transportation Authority and also SACOG. And I did hear that, I think Mike from PCTPA said that one of the things that you may be looking forward to is having a train stop in Rockland or Roseville or something like that. So, so maybe it would be good for us to, maybe put something in there to work with PCTPA or continue to check with SACOG and make sure that, our residents' needs are heard.
Yeah. One good idea I thought that was put forth is to try to get Amtrak on a number of stops during the day when they go through on their train. They don't have a train, they actually have an Amtrak bus. So since they don't want to stop the train in Loomis, maybe they can take their Amtrak bus and make a stop in Loomis. And that would be probably several stops a day. And I thought that was a great idea.
That's what happens in most places around the Bay Area too, where Amtrak train only goes certain spots, but they time the bus connection so that it's convenient to still get where you're going.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say one other thing is, so this is unrelated, not that I'm trying to decide or anything, but it looks like you have implementation measure 5141, 5142, but then it says 5243. That's supposed to be 5143.
Oh, yeah.
Good catch, David.
Yeah, there's a few misnumberings in here, and I apologize for that. When you move things around, it's sometimes complicated to keep.
It had confused me earlier because I was like, why don't you just label it? Seems like it should be labeled nice and orderly, and it didn't make any sense to me. But then it's because I couldn't see the ones above it.
It will make perfect sense when it's all clear.
Okay. Where were we? Okay, I think we got through this one.
We're on 5161, I think.
And then we started talking about long trips and better transit. Okay. So I guess we're to this one, which is going to speak to David, what your question? So to implement this policy about conditioning projects for consistency, the town will use an efficiency-based threshold, net GHG emissions per capita or per service population or other metric, to evaluate new development and whether net new GHG emissions would be consistent with the state's GHG reduction mandates. When necessary, new development shall incorporate feasible GHG emission reduction measures, best available control technologies, performance standards, and/or verifiable and additional offsets or offsite energy improvements. So this is a lot, but it is, and David asked whether it's the town's responsibility to condition projects to be consistent with what the state wants to see. That's a good question. And I would ask that question too if it were related to almost any other topic. However, with greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at the body of precedent case law, so now we're in the CEQA realm. That's what this is about. This is about how the town's going to conduct California Environmental Quality Act CEQA review of projects. In the CEQA realm, the basic consensus is from precedent case law is the right approach is to have projects evaluate whether they would be part of the solution or whether they're part of the problem in hitting the state's greenhouse gas reduction mandates. And so that's what that policy is trying to do. That's what this implementation measure is trying to do. It's trying to provide guidance to future developments on how the town is going to decide whether the project has a significant effect on GHG emissions or whether it's a less than significant. And I'm using the term efficiency-based threshold, also consistent with the most important precedent case law on greenhouse gas emissions. And to make the point that we're looking for efficiency, we're looking for low emissions on a per capita or per employee basis. We're not looking for projects to literally reduce net emissions. Right now it would be pretty expensive to do that. So we're not talking about mass emissions, the total amount of emissions. We're talking about emissions divided by some normalizing unit, like residential population or employment. I want to pause there because I'm sure I've introduced some confusion that I'd like to.
Matthew, is it possible in this implementation measure to simply state what you just said about are we creating a bigger problem or a smaller problem? I mean, I thought that was a great comment that I think would give guidance to prepare the environmental documents and the town staff and decision makers in the future.
Maybe, yeah. Let's see, we could say contribute to the state's targets, contribute to or not frustrate the state's targets. I don't want to use the pejorative, are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution necessarily, but I appreciate that Andy, that you liked my human way of saying this more than you liked how we said it in the implementation measure.
Well, let me tell you what, in writing a staff report, it's a lot easier to tell the commission and the council in a human way.
Maybe if you're contributing to contributing or alleviating, something to that effect, right? Like,
yeah, that would be good. Yeah. I mean, you could.
I gotta think about it a little bit more, but yeah.
I would say we don't have to wordsmith it now, but you get the idea, and I think that would be so helpful in explaining this, because we're in an uncharted territory trying to make our way through as projects come in, and this would just help guide that process. And going back, and someday, Jan, we'll probably have real regulations and quantified criteria that we can use, but no one in the state has got there.
It changes often, and that's the hard part about greenhouse gas regulations. They're very, they evolve very, very, very quickly. And so this is broad as possible, but understanding what you're saying, Anders, is providing like that concept is really useful in terms of what we're trying to get at.
Thank you.
The wording other metric kind of makes me nervous. Because it could be, I'm just going to use, my metric. I just made it up and it's going to work just fine. And so or are there similar metric, or are there something, and it's something that the town should, that's exactly right. We're all in consensus on that, right?
I think it's important to maintain an opportunity for other metrics because
I agree.
There's a lot of discussion right now about identifying ways to create normalizing metrics across projects for greenhouse gas emission standards to simplify this effort for each project. Normalizing might be the right word, but
I was going to say, or other similar is what I was going to say, but maybe other similar normalizing metric.
it may not.
But you're saying that similar doesn't, it may be something different than what they.
Yeah, it may not be too similar. So.
Okay. I don't know what metrics are out there is the problem, and so I'm just leaving it wide open is concerning. Exactly what you've written.
Yeah.
Well, David, it was interesting working on Costco and the Air Pollution Control District. There were like 4 or 5 different metrics that were being considered that all kind of got you to the same spot, but they were all different. And it was kind of finally coming down, and the APCD said, "This is the one we want to use."
Right.
But it was fluid.
I'm not worried about them using, as long as they're doing the right thing. I'm worried about people abusing it. So it says any other metric works in our general plan. So okay, let's just use that then.
What if we said something to the effect of, also, I've seen some policies where we require, with
Hey, Andreas has a comment, or other industry accepted metric.
I think that's a real good statement, because you can come in with different metrics to, that's going to make that will be in your favor.
Suzanne, you can see that in the comments there from Andreas.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that too, and that's a way to deal with this. But I also just want to point out that back in 2007, when we came up with the efficiency-based threshold ideas at that time for Bay Area Air Quality Management District, that was not an industry accepted because we just invented it in 2006. I remember those conversations very fondly in the lunchroom and stuff, arguing about what we ought to do. And industry accepted, I guess, kind of connotes to me that it's out there already. And, I just want to leave.
I didn't say widely accepted.
Oh, okay. All right.
If we want to get really precise about it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm good. I thought you were going to recommend we put in some Latin.
Sure. if you know any, I don't.
So can I get are we good with something like this? No objections to that? I'm seeing head nodding. I'm seeing more head nodding. Yeah. I'm seeing no shaking. Okay. All right. Okay, good. So, we're tying the review of future projects to the state's legislative framework. And, it's largely a legal risk management type of thing. So I just want to be sure that we are pausing enough on that point and getting consensus on that topic. It's very important. Okay. Now we move on to we've been talking about criteria air pollutant emissions, and we've been talking about greenhouse gas emissions. Now we're going to talk for a minute about toxic air contaminants. So the objective is the protection of public and environmental health through reduced exposure to air pollutant and toxic air contaminant emissions. And the policy here is that towns shall consider land use compatibility for the purposes of potential emission sources in proximity to sensitive receptors, and encourage the use of applicable buffer distances as recommended by the California Air Resources Board between sensitive uses and sources of substantial pollutant concentrations. In cases in which recommended buffers are infeasible, feasible alternative methods to reduce air pollutant concentrations from potential sources of toxic air contaminants shall be incorporated. So this is basically referring to some guidebooks that ARB has put out that say things like, well, new residences should be at least 500 feet from large volume highways, and keep residents away from ports with major diesel sorts of activity. And ARB updates that guidance over time, looking at public health and environmental health standards.
You know, zoning ordinances kind of address that, because if you get an auto shop, and we have a auto body shop coming in, they'll probably be doing some painting, and a lot of that's going to come up, and a lot of it has to do with where you're putting it. So I think a lot of that is already kind of taken care of, at least from what I've seen in past experience in different projects that's come through Lumos.
But the zoning relies on the general plan, so you have to have the policy in the general plan to allow you to write the zoning code. So remember that the general plan is that overarching document that gives you permission to do those things in the code. And one of the things we're looking at right now, your code has a number of things that are not authorized by the general plan. So we're having to go back and forth and make sure they're there. So
Okay.
Lorraine just said something in the chat. How broad is your definition of sensitive receptors?
I've seen different groups use different identifications for sensitive receptors, whether it's, are we talking churches, schools, senior centers? There's some things that are typically not included, so I'd like to know what we're using here.
Are they defined already in the California Air
There's
Resources
different
Board?
definitions depending on the industry, and the oil and gas industry has used a very broad definition or very minimal definition, and that has not typically included children, pregnant women, and seniors. That, to my knowledge, they have sometimes included hospitals.
Yes.
So I'm concerned that that's not specific enough to tell me what you're really intending.
Christy, do we have a definition in the glossary on sensitive uses? I know in most environmental documents, schools, senior centers, assisted living centers, senior citizens are all listed as sensitive, and that's pretty typical, but I don't know if we have anything in the glossary.
I believe we do. I'll check right now.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and the definition we usually use for this purpose, or I shouldn't say usually, the definition we always use is residences, convalescent homes, hospitals, senior centers, medical clinics. What else am I?
Care facilities.
Oh yeah, residential care facilities.
Preschools.
Yeah.
And
There is no definition in the glossary, by the way.
It is?
It is.
There is none.
Oh,
So
Okay,
we
yeah.
will add one.
Yes.
Yeah, great. That's a great comment. Absolutely, we'll do that. I agree with the recommendation that it be broad as we have discussed. It would not include commercial uses or industrial uses, but it would have all those other components.
Doesn't CARB have a standard definition or list of the sensitive receptors? I see you referred to as recommended by the California Air Resources Board. So
yeah, what I'm referring to is the sources and the buffers, not the definition of sensitive uses. And I'm sure they provide ARB provides examples of that, but I don't know that I don't know that ARB has a rule or a regulation. They must because they need to define these when they are starting to look at port regulations, electrification requirements for warehousing and things like that. So we could key off of something ARB has put together, I think. But in either case, we have a working definition that we can use, even if ARB hasn't done anything on that topic.
And Christy, as we write the definition in the glossary, I think we should say examples of, so it gives us some flexibility in interpreting adjacent uses rather than somebody coming in and saying, you did not include my exact use and therefore I don't count. So definitely we want to say these are a range of examples that exemplify sensitive uses.
Okay.
Michelle wrote in the chat regarding a UK study that was interesting, that it's not just car emissions. There is no safe level for fine particulates that come from tires, roads, and brakes, and it leads to a lot of deaths. Another reason we need fewer cars and lower VMT, not just different cars, parentheses, electric cars.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a different kind of particulate matter that we assess in terms of that brake wear and tire wear and fugitive dust as compared to the exhaust. So that's a great comment there. And no matter what kind of car you have on the road, if you those are still going to be emissions.
And Suzanne, isn't Placer County PM10 is the pollutant we're not in compliance with?
Yeah, particularly.
Do we have anywhere in here, do air pollutants and toxic air contaminant emissions, does those COVID, like any kind of disease, do those kind of things come into play in here? I mean, it's obviously we would want to protect our public from those kinds of things, but is that something that would that be in like a public safety place instead of a air and I don't know. It's actually.
I don't know. That sounds more like public safety. And I don't think there is any discussion like that.
Because I mean, we could increase the if we. It wouldn't be in land use. It wouldn't be in this specific policy, but it would be somewhere where we would have to increase the airflow in commercial buildings or something like that, and it would come into play somewhere in a different ordinance or something else. But I would just want to verify that are we neglecting that in this objective in NR 5.2? Is that something we're completely ignoring, or is that an actual contaminant?
Good question, David.
I'm thinking.
Well, that should be covered under just health and safety, which would be a entirely different section. And the Placer County would cover that.
Yeah, I think it is appropriate to think about jurisdiction on that topic. There's a reason why there are county health departments and state and federal, and not every city doing their own thing.
Yeah.
But I think it is worthwhile noting that it's something to think about when we're reviewing projects and considering projects. So I think your comment there about public health and safety element, and then referring to the Placer County health as well, and state and federal also. So
yeah,
I think we'll have to look at that in the health and safety element.
Because that's actually something that I think they've been talking about, that states and counties, nobody has any regulations for the amount of air circulation that has to exist in buildings. I mean, nobody's doing, federal doesn't have it that I know of.
No,
and so,
there are regulations.
But
There
not for diseases, but for like regular particles and stuff like that. I'm assuming hospitals can do it. But
yeah, hospitals do for sure, big time. And I think I would think other buildings in their air handling system and maybe types of filters that they have to have.
Yes, that's true.
I just feel like it's a conversation that should show up somewhere, and I haven't seen it I haven't seen it anywhere in any of these meetings yet, and I just thought of it, so it's probably it's not something I oddly think about all the time, even though COVID is all over the place.
That's noted, David. So Christy and I, Matthew, will take a look at where appropriately to.
Okay, thank you.
Do that.
And then just let me explain one little bit. Think about toxic air contaminant sensitive uses. Buffers are this for the first line of defense, and then I'm referencing where that's not possible, where that's not feasible, then feasible alternative methods to reduce concentrations should be used. So that could include where you're talking about high efficiency particle filtration devices, for example, that clean the air if you can't get sensitive uses far enough away from sources of pollution. Okay, so moving along here, recognizing that trees and other vegetation can provide a biological means of reducing air contaminants. Existing trees should be retained and incorporated in the project design where feasible. Additional planting of large number of trees along roadways and parking areas shall be encouraged.
I see that you have the large number underlined.
Oh, it's just Word is wanting me to.
Oh, I see. Word is doing it. Yeah, and it's a large number. That seems a little vague to me.
Yeah.
Even if it says the additional planting of an appropriate, an appropriate number of trees. I mean, I don't know.
I like appropriate because, you know, from a biological standpoint, some trees can be closer together than others. So I like the idea of appropriate number. You know, and it gets, and Matthew kind of gets into healthy trees and that kind of thing. So.
And we might want to say it's not every type of tree, actually. So maybe we make a general reference that we're talking about long needle evergreens, basically. It's not everything that gets you anywhere on filtering air pollutant.
Okay, that's good to know because the town just produced a recommended tree list, Matthew. So if you want to take a look at that and maybe define what are good trees for purposes of air quality, that might be very helpful.
Yeah. And some species are polluting too.
Maureen?
Yeah, in the downtown Taylor Road committee, we talked about creating a metric for adding trees to parking lots. Is that something we'd want to do here? Like one tree for 5 parking spaces?
It may not be the place to put it in here other than the, you know, there's another discussion about coverage of trees and those kinds of things. So
any project that comes through, including parking lots, has to have a landscape design. And I know they take a lot of that into consideration when they present those landscape designs for any kind of a project. I would also maybe add into this, besides trees, over parking lots, that you'd have solar panel coverage, maybe in lieu of, or one or the other, or in addition.
Okay.
Suzanne, do we know the reduction of pollutants because of solar versus trees by any chance? Is there a metric?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, and I would say that it's going to evolve with solar technology, of course. But in terms of like per square foot, you know, that'll definitely change quickly. And there's, in a way, trees can serve multiple purposes in a way that solar can't. So they're kind of a yin and a yang that can work together more so than an all one versus the other, I would recommend.
Okay.
Well, I think the solar is you're pulling you're using renewable energy that's not polluting. So you're reducing carbon by through energy produced elsewhere, not being, coal or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I'm fully in support of solar panels over parking lots, but exactly what you said is that you're cleaning the air somewhere else by putting up a solar panel, whereas you put a tree and you're cleaning the air right there. And so if you're trying to reduce immediate or surrounding air contaminants, then trees are better. If you're trying to reduce overall air contaminants, then solar panels also work. So it depends on what, I guess it kind of depends on what we're trying to do with this implementation measure. What's the purpose of it?
I think it also fits into the issue of cooling. Really important. Both of them accomplish that. And
yes, they both do
a
that.
large part of it is also a big issue of, do you have water on those parking lots to feed those trees? Because dead trees are fire hazards.
That's a very good point during a drought.
Well, and also as technology advances and this general plan is 20 years from now, is solar going to be the thing?
Solar will always be a thing, but it will probably be different. It may look completely different, but it should always be included.
They're going to have solar panels that are going to look like trees.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That would be
just
great.
being funny.
When do you have those coming out?
Like the cell phone towers,
I hope they become very small.
Shade on parking lots is not going to become less important with global warming. It's becoming increasingly important as people have to walk. I mean, and I understand that in Arizona, the city's passed out white umbrellas to get people across parking lots because it was less expensive than calling the ambulance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someday we'll have fewer parking lots because we have fewer cars.
Yeah.
I would almost suggest that it goes into, you can make two different implementation measures there, where you have one where it's talking about reducing contaminants and another one which is talking about the just overall GHGs and heat and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'd offer that there's kind of two different topics being discussed right now, and this is about reducing exposure to contaminants, not so much as reducing greenhouse gas emissions or the emissions from exhaust. It's hard to differentiate the two, but they're actually intertwined and at the same time separate. So what we're looking at here is that trees offer an opportunity to both reduce exposure, so pollutants get dispersed as well as absorbed, as well as you have trees that can reduce pollution as well as actually emit pollutants. And so you don't want to be planting trees that emit pollutants. So there's this concept of vegetation can also be separate from the concept of reducing greenhouse gas and air pollutant emissions from exhaust. This is just about reducing the exposure of people that are in proximity to an emission source, I would say. A little bit separate from, I appreciate all the discussions going on. Matthew's noted here, and that we need to definitely acknowledge with regards to solar and opportunities to reduce criteria air pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions. But note that trees can also serve an additional purpose.
I think I have good direction to make those revisions. So can we move ahead? Okay. Next up, another implementation measure about toxic air contaminants. Town shall coordinate, usually these say will. The town will coordinate with the air district, get rid of an acronym, evaluating the exposure of sensitive receptors to toxic air contaminants. When projects could generate or expose sensitive uses to substantial air pollutant concentrations, the town will require a screening level analysis and, if necessary, more detailed health risk analysis to assess potential health impacts. projects shown to result in significant health risks shall incorporate strategies recommended by the Air District and other effective strategies as needed to reduce exposure and related impacts.
What is in it? It says when projects could generate or expose sensitive uses. What is that? Is uses the right word there, or is it like it's not users, but it's like it should be people? Sensitive. What I'm just not. I'm not understanding what it means by a sensitive use.
Yeah, it's a term that is well recognized in this sort of air quality analysis to mean sensitive uses are, we're keying to the use. So sensitive uses include residential, hospitals, schools, convalescent homes, residential care facilities.
Okay.
Which we will define, sensitive uses we will define in the glossary, and we'll include those items. And, for that matter, we're going to probably also define noise sensitive uses and vibration sensitive uses.
So is it this? So it's different than the sensitive receptors from before, or is it the same as that?
Oh, yes, good question. Those terms are used interchangeably, but maybe we should not use them interchangeably. I think sensitive receptors is a little more common.
I think you're right.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the sentence right before that, you use sensitive receptors as well. So it would be weird to have this, to mean the same thing, but use two different words for it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Good point. Okay, so now we're moving on to this the next implementation measure. The town will evaluate proposed development using Air District recommended buffer distances for land uses known to generate substantial odors in order to minimize the exposure of sensitive land uses to substantial odors. So just like ARB, the Air Resources Board publishes guidance on buffering from major sources of toxic air contaminants. The Air District and other agencies put out guidance that, for example, homes should be located at least a mile from a wastewater treatment plant or landfill distances and other odor-producing uses.
And substantial is defined somewhere else. Is that a industry specific term?
Yes.
Okay.
Now that kind of makes you think about agriculture and, people when they build houses next to people who have animals. And I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, but.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it runs into conflict. People move in, and usually when they have a situation like that, then there's disclosure agreements, documents that people have to sign when they move in that they're not going to complain about the farm animals that they're moving next to.
Yeah, I think it depends on how many farm animals you have, though, too. If you have
it doesn't take acres, but one billy goat to create a problem.
That's right. For some people, but then some people want to put about 80 head of horses on a 20-acre plot of land too. So
yeah,
that would be appropriate use. But Air Pollution Control District does get involved with, say, we had a situation where someone was slaughtering pigs and they were burning the carcasses. So
wow.
That's illegal. It happened in Loomis, but Placer County Air Pollution Control District came down and, they were cited several times and they stopped. They were able to stop them. But you're right. There are people who move to the country and then they don't like the smell of the country compared to what they thought they saw on TV. So
yeah, we definitely need to allow for current owners who are using their property for agriculture to continue doing that, even if the development's built right next to them.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Matthew, that's in the right to farm ordinance in the code.
Addresses livestock also.
Yeah, it addresses warning prospective purchasers or tenants of a property adjoining agricultural operations that they may be subject to some odors or other nuisances. But you know, they've been warned essentially.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe we can make a reference.
Yeah, it's
here to that then.
13.50 of the code.
You just knew that off the top of your head.
Right. It's on my screen.
That's scary.
And part of it is we did reference the air district's recommended buffer distances here. They do have a screening table that identifies uses specifically. It's not just anybody come in and say, well, this is a odor nuisance, right? Not just, you can't just name it haphazardly. We try to reference a kind of reputable source here. And just to note, feedlot and dairy is on the list, but that's it. And I think Matthew's notes here cover everything you guys have discussed. So, but just to give you an idea of what this PCA PCD recommended buffer distance covers. It's not generally agriculture as an overall source of odor.
Okay, good. So moving on to our final topic, energy. And starting here with the objective to reduce energy consumption and increase use and generation and storage. Use, generation, and storage. I added storage later of renewable energy. That's becoming increasingly important. And the first policy is collaborate with local energy providers to support energy efficiency incentive programs and consumer education. Encourage the availability, storage, and use of renewable energy in Loomis. Encourage energy efficiency measures in existing and new development. And then 2 implementation measures here. Town will maintain and update the municipal code as appropriate to provide clear guidance for renewable energy generation and storage infrastructure. And the town will pursue funding and financing programs for installation and use of renewable energy infrastructure in new and existing development, as well as energy efficiency retrofits of existing buildings. Any thoughts on this or topics that I may have missed?
You're going to kill me, Jeff, but I can't remember what's the name of the people who generate all of our power. That's the committee you're on. You're muted.
Pioneer.
That's right.
Pioneer, that's what it is. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Is there
you.
something that we should, is there something we could or something we should put in here that says that we would like to encourage, Pioneer to do that? Does that also?
Pioneer's already, doing things or trying to with our.
Right,
Yeah.
and they're doing that on their own. But I mean, if we, and I mean, you're on the council and you're also on their committee. And so you specifically can say that you want to, Pioneer to be more clean. But if our general plan says that we want all of our generation sources to be cleaner, I mean, I don't know if that already says that in there, if that's what that's saying, but should we need to mention that, or is it something we should have the general plan say?
Yeah, we just instituted a plan that if you, as an individual, I suppose the state or the town government could request to buy nothing but green energy. That's an option you have through Pioneer now, just recently. They also sent out information regarding the money that is going to be available for us to use for energy charging or electric vehicle charging stations. So that's Sean's aware of that as well. But I mean, as things go on, we're always going to be trying to get, access to funding for those types of things. I mean, whether people believe that gasoline cars will be gone in 2035 or not, it's good to be diverse in our energy consumption to the point of like trying to make it just not one monopoly of one certain energy type of situation. Diversity is good. So,
Right.
But they do offer that to get to.
Is that covered? So I guess my question is, should the town be pushing Pioneer and PG&E to do this in the general plan, or does it say that we're, by just the objective there in our 55.3, is that saying that we're already encouraging the increase in generation of?
I think as a matter of style, we shouldn't be asking other public agencies to do things through our general plan, but rather take this framing that we kind of have in here where we will encourage this and work with them through people like Jeff.
All right.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you.
I should have said that at the beginning. Thanks.
That probably is what you said. I just didn't quite understand it as well.
Okay. We're getting close to historic. Yep. Yeah, we're almost there, huh?
We are hoping, as far as the revised element goes. I have made note, and I've made a couple of changes as we've been working through this, and I've made things, and I feel pretty confident that I have clear direction in those areas where I didn't literally just make the change, but put down a note.
Okay, good. Very good. So are we at next steps, or are there any other questions at this time from committee?
Well, I think the first thing we have to ask, and Matthew did, but if we're done with this, then basically the committee's fulfilled its responsibility at this point in time, unless the committee feels there's issues that should be addressed. So if their issues have all been addressed, then I'd recommend that the next step would be for the committee to pass this on to the Conservation Committee for incorporation into the conservation element, and that this committee's responsibilities have been completed at this moment in time.
Okay. Does anyone want to comment on that? I feel good about what we've gotten done here. If
I would just say I feel confident about it too, but as a member of this committee and others, then I will be watching at the next meeting when all of our recommendations are being submitted, and we can continue to comment and be involved. So I just wanted to make sure that's known to everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
As this is submitted to the overall Umbrella Conservation Committee, then a few of you are on that committee already, and this committee will be invited to participate on that committee as these elements are combined into a single element, as these pieces are combined into a single element, and go through the discussion on the whole element. So yes, everybody here will be continued to be asked to be engaged in this process. And then especially the next step when it goes to the commission and you have a whole general plan pulled together and you can see it comprehensively, it's also essential that you retain review and coordination through this process.
The only other thing I would say is, if I know there was a few items that relate to other committees, maybe we could just have a little notation of what those are. So make sure that those notations get to those committees on our behalf.
They will.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we've been doing that all along. In fact, Christy tomorrow morning will be writing emails to each of the other committee, the technical leads.
It's usually tonight, so I will be sending Mario something about the equestrian trail and so on. So
but
after each meeting.
The thing is, I was just thinking what Jan was really asking, is it actually being viewed by the committees? And generally, each of the committees, at the beginning, there's kind of a list of here's the comments we received. But I don't know if we've been sending these kind of directives directly to the committee members. It's something that we can talk with Mary Beth about and Sean and consider doing that. They are being considered. They will be shared with the technical leads for incorporation. So yeah, that definitely is going on.
Yeah, that's great, because I do think it's important that, you know, I mean, there's public comment, of course, and there's committee comment, of course, but when there's a, you know, an entire committee all in agreement on something, and knowing that it's going to be sent to another committee, I think that committee should know where it's coming.
Right.
Agreed. And just so you know, I think we've said this before, but in each element, we'll have a small section saying the following other elements have policies related to this and they're referenced herein. And so that there's cross-referencing going between all the elements so that as you read the comprehensive general plan, you're not lost. You can say, hey, this is over here, because transportation, parks and recreation tie together, energy, circulation, land use tie together. So where there are overlapping policies, there will be a note in the general plan that those actually are occurring. But we have to make sure that we're not duplicating any of those. So that's the other challenge we have.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, it seems, to be able to get it just in the right, to the right committee, you know, by the right section or setting. So I appreciate all the work you're doing. So it looks like we have no public left. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we don't have any public comment. And does anyone else have anything to add as far as?
I just had a quick question. What would happen if, say, you know, if our committee, the greenhouse gas committee, said we want to improve, you know, increase the number of electric vehicles on the roads, and the circulation said that if you add more electric vehicles on the roads, it's worse, and we want more gas? I haven't seen any. I mean, I'm assuming that doesn't happen because I haven't seen anything between that you brought up saying, oh, this committee wants this and this committee wants this, and it's anti what we're saying.
At this point in time, for the conservation, that would go to the conservation committee, the umbrella committee, and sort that out. If they can't sort it out, it then goes to the planning commission, and ultimately it's the council. And one of the thoughts we've had is if we get to a point where there are those conflicting policies, we're probably going to do a workshop between the planning commission and council and let them make the policy decisions about which way to go. Okay. You know, it's the committee can make the recommendations, but bottom line is council who has to make the policy choice about what they're going to do.
And you would point them out?
Oh yeah.
Okay. You would just expect them to find them buried in there, and
no.
You got, yeah, okay.
I will tell you so far, and Christy, maybe you can, but I haven't seen any major conflicts. I see refinements, but no conflicts in. My overall observation is this town is pretty darn focused on where you're going. You're pretty darn focused on similar goals, policies, objectives, and I haven't seen conflict, which is amazing. It really is amazing.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we're going to need a motion to move this onto the Umbrella Conservation of Resources Committee. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
And what would that be, Anders?
Oh boy, I just wrote one up for another committee today. It would be that the motion is that the air quality, greenhouse gas, and whatever you are, that whole committee name, recommends to the Umbrella Conservation Committee the goals, policies, and objectives as modified and recommended tonight be incorporated into the conservation element, and that we find that this committee's task at this time is complete.
Okay, who wants to repeat that?
I put it in the chat.
Thank you, Christy.
Okay,
Yeah.
we did this, Carol, we did this the other day and it was successful. So do you want to do it the same way we did it the other conservation resource or committee, the historical and cultural?
Andreas, how does this work for you?
How about somebody motions to move to approve staff's recommended action?
Excellent.
That's easy.
Yeah.
Move to, what did you say? Move to accept?
Move to approve staff's recommended action, and staff's recommended action was posted into the chat by Christy.
Got it. Okay, got it. Okay.
I'll go ahead and move that we recommend the staff's recommended action. We move it forward to the next committee.
Hey, have a motion.
Second,
I heard a second.
do we have a second? Yeah, okay. I'll second that.
Yes.
Okay, somewhere I've got to find your roll call list here because I can't find it. It was in my hands. I don't know how it disappeared. Okay, hang on just a second here because I guess I could look at your faces. Jeff Duncan.
You have to do this verbally for the purposes of.
Oh, yeah, I have to do a verbal one, so yes.
Yeah.
Jeff
Yes.
Duncan.
Yes.
David Ring.
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood.
Yes.
Maureen Valley.
Yes.
Jan Clark Kretz.
Yes.
Greg Obranovich.
Yes.
That's everyone, right? Oh, and Lorraine Theobald.
You didn't see her face.
I didn't see her face.
Okay.
All right. Hey, thank you all very much. You've been amazing. I just thank you, Matthew. Awesome. And Suzanne, thank you for your educated comments. It's appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew and Suzanne. We'll be seeing you in the next committee, I suppose, the umbrella committee, right? And thanks to everyone who's participated. And of course, our regular staff and Christy and Anders, Carol, Mary Beth. And I don't know who else will be heading to the next committee, but it looks like people are still on other committees, I'm sure. So we need to keep soldiering on.
Yeah.
Won't be long and we maybe be able to meet all the time in public. I don't know if everybody else is ready for that. I definitely am, so.
Oh, and Mary Beth has some announcements. I keep, with all these committees, we make these announcements, but you haven't heard. So, Mary Beth.
Okay, I want to thank Andreas too.
Yes.
My two announcements relate to some, we have two general plan element public input workshops coming up. One is Tuesday, June 15th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Blue Goose. The second one will be Saturday, June 19th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. They will be live streamed through YouTube, but they will not be Zoom meetings. So we're really encouraging people to get out of their comfort zone and come out and actually partake and review the elements with us and make additional public input. You know, we have committee meetings and sometimes people from the public attend, sometimes people watch them on YouTube, but you know, we're just trying to elicit all of those comments that we can. With the committees kind of, and especially the subcommittees wrapping up, our public comment that will, like for this committee, if we get a comment in after this point in your committee is expired, those comments will forward to the umbrella committee. After the umbrella committee makes their recommendation going forward to the planning commission, comments received after that umbrella committee ends will forward to planning commission. And so on. So clear up the chain to when it gets back to council and public hearings and all of that. So we're just trying to really do a hardcore. We kind of failed in our November open houses because of the weather and things like that. So we're just trying to keep people engaged. We have put up some signs. We have a banner at the depot and one will be going up over Taylor. So just to encourage people to pay attention and get involved, you know, we really want their input. So even though we say public comment will end on June 30th, it will still continue. It's just those comments won't go to these committees. The other thing we posted on the website the comments received to date. So that was as of yesterday. So there's two different versions of it. One's in a PDF format, the other is an Excel sheet. So if people are more comfortable with an Excel sheet and, can move things around and sort them the way that they want, that's one way. Other people just like to see the text and they don't want to sort. And that's updated on a weekly basis. Comments are kind of starting to taper off, and that's why we're trying to bolster more community input and get that involvement happening. I think that was it for my spiel.
All right. Well, great. And we are ending at a perfect time. So this meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you around. Hopefully we'll see you at the Blue Goose or the train depot, sorry. LBB, no.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Christy, Anders,
Thanks, everybody. Good to see everybody.
with you on this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great work.
All right, all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.